Many of the great movers and shakers throughout history have been charming men. Men who could flash a smile or use their devilish good looks to persuade people to do almost anything. But sometimes there's something more sinister hiding behind a charming smile. Sometimes all that charm and bravado comes at a cost. Sometimes some of the most charming men are hiding things they don't want anyone to know about. From debonaire revolutionaries to jilted actors who turn to political subterfuge, here are some of the filthiest secrets of the most charming men in history. Lord Byron. Have you ever met someone in person for the first time, but they don't really look like the pictures you've seen of them? Anyone who's ever used a dating app can probably attest to this. The same was true a couple hundred years ago, too. Lord Byron, the great English poet known for his romantic verses, had a reputation as a handsome charmer and was painted in all his glorious good looks here and here. But apparently, those portraits were a bit deceiving. In reality, Byron was what some have called an overweight poser. Ouch. Lord Byron was the author of the famed Don Juan epic poems and a key contributor to the Romantic movement during the early part of the 19th century. He was known for his good looks, charm, and charismatic personality, all of which made him a pretty popular figure in literary circles and in society at large. Byron's charm and wit were obviously conveyed best through his poetry that explored themes of love, beauty, and seduction, themes he certainly lived out during his lifetime. He was known for living an unconventional lifestyle and was a vocal critic of societal norms and institutions, which led him to challenge many of the traditional beliefs about religion and morality. He also had a reputation as a ladies' man, and he had quite a few what they might have called romantic liaisons back then. Liaisons that became hot, scandalous, 19th century tabloid-style gossip during his lifetime. One of those scandals was so, scandalous that Byron actually had to leave England. The scandal was an affair with a British aristocrat and writer named Lady Caroline Lamb. Despite the fact that Lady Caroline was married with a few children, the two fired up a passionate affair that lasted for some months. But the relationship soon turned sour, and Lady Caroline began to exhibit signs of mental instability, including fits of jealousy and irrational behavior. She also became increasingly resentful of Byron's infidelities and his refusal to commit to her. In 1812, Lady Caroline decided to take revenge on Byron by publicly exposing their affair and spreading rumors about his intimate promiscuities. She even wrote a thinly veiled novel called Glenarvan that featured a character based on Byron and portrayed him in a less than flattering light. Things, though, took a turn for the dark at a party they were both attending. Byron apparently insulted Lady Caroline, and she responded by breaking a wine glass on herself. She was okay, but the incident hit the gossip circles harder than Byron's member of parliament when he saw a woman he liked. The whole thing was a major blow to Byron's reputation, and he was eventually forced to leave England in order to avoid further embarrassment. He'd never return, instead living out the rest of his life in Italy and Greece. Lady Caroline's actions also caused a rift within her own social circle, and she became something of a pariah in the aristocratic world. And all of this despite the fact that Byron was apparently much more overweight than he appears in his portraits. According to those who knew him, Byron was actually pretty obese, and he did all kinds of things to hide his weight, like wearing corsets and loose clothing. Yet despite his efforts to present a more idolized image of himself, he was still widely admired for his brains and his ability to pen a killer sonnet. The original Casanova. When you call someone a real Casanova, you're calling them a ladies' man, a lover boy, someone who can charm women. It's a pretty popular term. There's even a rapper who's taken the name for himself. But the original Casanova was, a guy named Casanova. Giacomo Casanova lived from 1725 to 1798. Born in Venice, he became an adventurer, a writer, a degenerate gambler, and even a violinist in an orchestra. He traveled the world, was accused of being a spy, faced multiple trials revolving around his less than savory intimate affairs. Oh, and he wrote a memoir about it all that became one of the spiciest reads of the 18th and 19th centuries. One of the most scandalous episodes in Casanova's memoirs is his account of his affair with a nun. In his memoir, titled rather uncreatively A History of My Life, Casanova met the young nun while she was taking a walk in the garden of her convent. He only refers to her as MM, but he was immediately struck by her beauty and intelligence, and they began talking. Uh-oh. The two began a passionate affair, meeting in secret and exchanging spicy letters. In his memoir, Casanova describes their encounters in pretty vivid detail, including one particular memorable episode where they did it in a gondola on the canals of Venice. Eventually, their affair was discovered. The rest of the nuns were not pleased, to say the least, and MM was flogged and imprisoned for a bit before they let her repent and rejoin the order. Casanova himself narrowly escaped being caught and punished, but the experience left him shaken and forced to rethink some of his libertine ways. I'm not sure how much he actually changed, though. Casanova also had a series of run-ins with the law. A lot of Casanova's intimate encounters involved younger women. When he was just 20, Casanova was accused of seducing a young woman named Teresa Lanti. According to Casanova's own account in his memoirs, he met Teresa at a ball in Venice, and he was immediately, let's say, besotted. They began a brief love affair, but when Teresa's family found out about the relationship, they accused Casanova of seducing her and demanded that he marry her to preserve her reputation. Casanova refused to marry Teresa, though, arguing that he did not have enough money to support her and that he didn't even love her enough to spend the rest of his life with her. The situation escalated, and Casanova was eventually arrested and charged with seduction. They actually charged people with that back then. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he managed to escape from prison and fled Venice for Padua. Another run-in came a few years later when Casanova was arrested for embezzling money from a client. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that he was also a lawyer? Casanova was apparently hired by a wealthy client to handle some sort of legal dispute. But in classic Casanova fashion, instead of resolving the case, he struck up an affair with the client's wife, and he used his position as the family's lawyer to start stealing their money. When the embezzlement was discovered, Casanova was arrested and imprisoned in the infamous Doge's Palace in Venice. He spent a few months in prison awaiting trial, during which time he wrote a whole lot about his experiences and his thoughts on life, love, and morality. Yeah, morality! Eventually, Casanova was found guilty of embezzlement and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. But the intrepid Casanova once again managed to escape from prison, this time with the help of a fellow prisoner who apparently had access to the prison's secret passages. He fled Venice and spent the next several years traveling throughout Europe, continuing his spree of love affairs and adventures. The most handsome man in America. If I showed you a photo of this guy, what would you say? Pretty handsome, I guess. In fact, this guy was a pretty talented actor who at one point in the mid-1800s was considered one of the most handsome men in America. But his name is John Wilkes Booth. Yeah, that John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth came from a family of actors, with his father and 2 older brothers who also worked in the theater. Together with his brothers Edwin and Junius, John Wilkes Booth performed in a production of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in 1864. The production was a benefit performance to raise money for a statue of Shakespeare in Central Park, which still stands today. The Booth brothers apparently knocked the play out of the park. They were known for their talent and charm on stage, and their performance in Julius Caesar was well received. Despite their success as actors, there was also a fierce rivalry between John Wilkes Booth and his older brother, Edwin. Edwin was considered the more talented and successful of the two, and the rivalry is said to have been fueled by their differing political views. After John was finally dead in the barn where he was hiding out after the fateful evening at Ford's Theater, Edwin wrote a letter to his sister, imploring her to think no more of him as your brother. He is dead to us now, as he must be to all the world. But imagine the boy you love to be in that better part of his spirit in another world. John Wilkes Booth went from a talented, handsome actor to a deranged vigilante. Alexander the Handsome. Alexander the Great was known for his charisma and charm. It definitely helped as he stormed across Eastern Europe and Asia. He was able to win over a lot of people when he wasn't pounding their armies to a pulp. He had a magnetic personality and commanding presence that made him a natural leader. A leader that was able to conquer a pretty good chunk of the known world until his death in 323 BC. One time, he charmed the pants off an Indian king, Porus, who had just been defeated by Alexander's army in the Battle of Hydaspes in 326 BC. Despite being defeated, Porus was so impressed by Alexander's courage and bearing that he apparently said, "Treat me as a king should be treated, Alexander." Alexander, impressed by Porus's response, granted him his freedom and his kingdom, albeit as a Macedonian vassal state.
Alexander also had a reputation for being a ladies' man, and he had several well-known affairs throughout his life. One of the most famous was his relationship with Roxana, a Persian princess whom he captured during his conquest of the Persian Empire. He married her in a lavish ceremony in 327 BC, which was seen as a strategic move to solidify his power in the region, despite some pushback from his generals who didn't like that their leader was marrying a non-Macedonian. They should have been used to it already, though. Alexander had already married 2 other Persian princesses, Statotera and Persatis, and had a long-term relationship with another woman, Barsine. In addition to his "I'm gonna conquer the world" charm that was often just a result of a powerful man getting whatever and whoever he wanted, Alexander the Great was also known for being a ruthless general who wouldn't tolerate any insubordination or disloyalty. He famously ended the life of his childhood friend Cletus in a fit of rage after Cletus criticized his decision-making. This incident showed that Alexander had a darker side to his personality, and that he was willing to do whatever it took to maintain his power. History's best-dressed revolutionary.
Next up, we have a guy with a sombrero who you could land a helicopter on, and a suit so sharp you could cut a steak with it. Emiliano Zapata was a key figure in the Mexican Revolution that began in 1910. He's remembered as a charismatic leader who championed the rights of the poor and oppressed people of Mexico. Zapata was known for his distinctive style of dress, which included a large sombrero and a well-groomed mustache, and also a neatly pressed suit.
Zapata's dapper appearance wasn't just a matter of personal style, it was a deliberate choice designed to convey a sense of authority and respectability to the people he met. He wanted to be taken seriously as a leader, and he knew that his appearance would play a crucial role in achieving what he wanted, which was a more egalitarian Mexico. Zapata was charismatic and charming for sure, and his focus on land reform and the rights of peasants made him a very popular figure among the poor and marginalized communities in Mexico. Yet in the middle of all this reform, Zapata was assassinated in 1919 by government forces loyal to then-President Venustiano Carranza. He was ambushed while meeting with government officials to discuss a possible peace settlement and was shot multiple times. Still, his resistance, his revolutionary zeal, and his famous sombrero has made him a hero in Mexico ever since. But there are some less than savory details about Zapata. His personal life is a largely mysterious one, but there's been a lot of speculation that he enjoyed the ladies. A lot! There are a few claims that Zapata had relationships with multiple women, some of whom he considered his wives. According to some sources, Zapata had up to 10 wives, though the exact number and identities of these women are uncertain. Despite his questionable and unclear personal relationships, Zapata remains a hero in Mexico, someone akin to Che Guevara and how he pushed against the social inequalities of his time through revolution. Leo the Charmer.
Leonardo da Vinci was a lot of things: a painter, an inventor, an engineer, a botanist, a cartographer, an architect, and that list could go on. That's probably what made him so charming. Not so much is known about the elusive polymath's personal life, but we do have some juicy snippets.
A lot about what we know about da Vinci comes from a guy named Giorgio Vasari. Giorgio Vasari was a 16th century Italian painter and writer who also wrote a biography of Leo. In it, he describes him as a man who transcended nature with his remarkable beauty, grace, and abundance of talent. Vasari's description of da Vinci as a charming and sparkling conversationalist has been echoed by a lot of people who knew him. According to Vasari, da Vinci's charm and grace went beyond his physical appearance and natural talent. He was a witty and engaging conversationalist who had a gift for making everyone around him feel at ease.
His knowledge of, well, just about everything made him a hit wherever he went, and he was known to hold court at dinner parties and other Renaissance events where people with big feathers in their big hats talked about how big their feathers in their hats were.
Da Vinci was so charming that he ended up casting a spell on the powerful Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. The Duke was so impressed by da Vinci that he commissioned him to create a bronze statue of himself. According to Vasari, the Duke was so taken with da Vinci that he would often visit him in his studio to discuss art and hat feathers. During one of these visits, the Duke was so entranced by da Vinci's beauty that he asked him to remove his shirt so that he could admire his physique, which was something that da Vinci probably didn't mind. While da Vinci himself was pretty silent in his own writings about what he was into, there's a lot of speculation that he was into just about everything, kind of like an intimate superhero. He's also quoted as saying the act of procreation and anything that has any relation to it is so disgusting that human beings would soon die out if there were no pretty faces and sensuous dispositions. There's also the fact that Da Vinci liked to dig up deceased bodies and dissect them, for science, of course. This was illegal, so Da Vinci went around to hospitals and morgue, sometimes getting executed criminals and other unclaimed cadavers. If that didn't work, he even went out to graveyards himself to get a specimen. The things people do in the name of science. Hemingway's vices.
Ernest Hemingway was probably the most celebrated writer of the 20th century. His writing style was short and no nonsense, and in a way it changed how words were put down on a page. He was also a man amongst men, charming and well-traveled. He drove ambulances in World War I, he covered the Spanish Civil War, he went hunting in Africa, deep-sea fishing in the Caribbean, and attended bullfights in Spain. He even survived 2 plane crashes. But Hemingway had a darker side to him.
As the years went on, he became a violent drunkard and would often take his aggression out on his wives. Hemingway was married 4 times during his life, and none of them were the most wholesome of marriages. His second wife, Pauline Pfeiffer, was said to have suffered the most from his violent outburst. Things got worse in 1937 during a trip to Key West with Pauline. According to Hemingway's biographer, Carlos Baker, Hemingway became convinced that Pauline was having an affair with their mutual friend, John Dos Passos. Pauline was pregnant at the time, and when the two got into an argument over it, he reportedly pushed her down and caused her to miscarry. Hemingway's drinking continued to escalate in the years that followed, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. According to A.E. Hotchner, a close friend of Hemingway's, the writer was once so drunk that he threatened to end the life of one of his other wives, Mary, with a firearm. And another time, he became convinced that a group of men were following him and attempting to harm him, and he barricaded himself in his hotel room. Hemingway's alcoholism also had a negative impact on his writing. In the years leading up to his death, he struggled to write anything with the quality of his earlier novels. A lot of his later stuff was criticized for being overly sentimental and lacking the sharp prose that had made him famous. He was concussed a lot over the course of his life, and the plane crashes didn't help. Towards the end of his life, he was struggling to remember anything and could barely write, and soon passed away. The playwright who started a riot.
Imagine writing something so controversial that it started a riot. If you were the English playwright John Millington Synge, you didn't have to, because it actually happened. Synge was known for his charm and his striking good looks. Friends and colleagues commented all the time about how handsome he was. And he was more than just a pretty face. He was a pretty good writer too, and one piece in particular caused a bit of a stir.
The opening night of Synge's play, The Playboy of the Western World, at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin on September 26, 1907, was an eventful one. The play was set in a small Irish village and tells the story of a guy named Christy Mahan, who basically parts his father's head open with a spade, gets applauded for it, but then his dad comes back after he thought he finished the job, and then Christy tries again to whack him. The villagers thought the dad was again a goner, but then dad comes back again and they end up walking off together into the sunset. It's a strange comedy. The play's themes of violence, deception, and romanticism didn't exactly mesh with the conservative values of Irish society at the time. Synge also created an Englishized Irish hybrid for the play. Irish nationalists resented Synge's use of English in the play. They saw it as an affront to the Irish language and basically a symbol of English colonialism. So a riot broke out. It started in the second act of the play when a group of offended Irish began to heckle the actors and throw stuff at the stage. Some audience members reportedly even tried to set fire to the theater. The police were called in to restore order, and the play was forced to stop several times. The riots eventually broke out into the streets of Dublin before being stamped out by the police. Despite the chaos, the play was performed for several more nights, but the controversy surrounding it continued to cause outrage and debate in the Irish press. Despite the controversy, the play was a critical hit. Synge's use of language was pretty groundbreaking, and The Playboy of the Western World continues to be performed today. New York, New York.
Frank Sinatra, his baby blue eyes, and his velvety croon could woo just about anyone. He was one of the most popular and influential American singers and actors of the 20th century. But he was also no stranger to scandal.
One of the earliest controversies surrounding Sinatra occurred in the 1940s when he became associated with organized crime figures in New York and Los Angeles. He was friends with several well-known mobsters, including Sam Giancana, and was rumored to have performed at their social events. Sinatra was never charged with anything, but the implication was there. Sinatra also had, let's say, some turbulent relationships with women. He was married 4 times, and his relationships with women were often characterized by infidelity, jealousy, and violence. Throughout his life, Sinatra had affairs with quite a few famous Hollywood actresses, including Ava Gardner and Marilyn Monroe, and was rumored to have had relationships with a lot more. In 1951, Sinatra was implicated in a scandal involving the Mafia and women in the, streetwalker business. He was accused of arranging the women to be transported across state lines, but was never charged with any crimes. It did damage his reputation, though, and contributed to his split with Columbia Records in 1952. Sinatra's political views also caused controversy during his career. He was known to have close friendships with several high-ranking politicians, but in the early 70s he switched over to the Conservative Party, which didn't please a lot of his fans. The switch was said to have its roots in the early 60s when a well-known president basically snubbed him for Bing Crosby during a visit to Palm Springs, California. Sinatra thought the president was planning on staying at his home for the visit. Sinatra even built a helipad on his property to accommodate the man. But when he heard that the president chose to stay with Crosby, Sinatra was furious, and he started bashing up the helipad with a sledgehammer. What other charming men with dark sides do you know about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.